Alright guys, so this is chapter 14, and this is going to be a very long chapter, so there's going to be 3 lectures that are associated with this chapter, and it has to do with ICD coding, or the basics of diagnostic coding. Now, 2 things you need to have with you throughout this lecture so that you can refer to them both, because I will refer to them a lot throughout this lecture, is your KINS AMA textbook, which is the green book, looks just like this, and then you need an ICD book. You can either use this one or the one that is not spiral bound. And you need to have those both throughout this entire lecture because I will be referring to them many times and I want you to be able to flip through and follow along as we do that. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today and we're really going to learn on is of course the vocabulary terms as always. We're going to outline the historical use of ICD codes, and ICD stands for the International Classification of Disease in the United States. We'll describe the transition from ICD-9 to ICD-10 for diagnostic coding, and we're going to identify the structure and format of the ICD-10 manual. We're also going to explain how to use the alphabetical indexes to select the main terms, essential modifiers, and the appropriate code or codes and code ranges. And then we need to be able to do the following as it talks about the tabular list in the ICD manual, is explain how to use that tabular list and the appropriate code or codes and code ranges. And then summarize the coding conventions as defined in the ICD-10 coding manual. And then, of course, review coding guidelines and assign the most accurate ICD-10 code for that specific diagnosis. So there's a lot here, guys. It's going to be broken up into 3 main lectures for this unit, or for this chapter. And the first today is basically just the history and how the ICD-10 manual is set up. So those are really what we're going to talk about today. So the history of medical coding. Medical coding began as a medical classification in the 17th century England. In the mid-1800s, William Farr, a medical statistician, established an organized disease classification to widen the system to all patients of all ages. All right. And the League of Nations established in 1920 the International List of Diseases. And then in 1946, the International Commission of the World Health Organization, or the WHO, which stands for World Health Organization, established these codes, and they are called the Manual for the International Statistic Classifications of Diseases, Injuries, and Causes of Death, or ICD, which is now just International Classifications of Diseases. All right, that's where it goes in. So like ICD is the international version, so it's not just the United States, it's international. It's used in every single country that has medicine. It's copyrighted and published by the World Health Organization, and the WHO authorized an adoption for use in the United States. So the edition currently in use is the ICD-10, and that is the one that we have here. They update it every few years or so with new diseases and new codes and maybe some new different ways to code it, so it's important to keep up with that. And this ICD-10 is significantly different than the ICD-9 manual, and we'll talk a little bit about those differences today. The original purpose of medical coding was just to collect statistical data. And now the United States is the only country in the world that uses these codes for insurance reimbursement purposes, or so that your patient's health insurances will make payments for these diseases. So all components of the encounter are used to determine charges to generate an insurance claim to make to bill those insurance companies for the procedures and diagnoses that patient has. So what is diagnostic coding? We talked about the history a little bit. Now let's get into a little bit more about what it is. And it's a translation or a transformation of written descriptions of diseases, illnesses, injuries into numeric or alphanumeric codes. All right. The ICD-10 codes are used in the claim submission process to request reimbursement from payers, to track the diagnosis is treated by a provider, to provide statistical data to research, and for other purposes as well. Accurate use for ICD-10 CM manual is essential for accurate translation of medical records, diagnostic statements into alphanumeric codes. So these diagnostic statements are found in operative reports, discharge summaries, history and physical examination reports, and reports on ancillary diagnostic services. So when you use the ICD-10-CM, you choose a standardized and alphanumeric code for that diagnostic statement. Practice management softwares, clearinghouses, third-party payers all recognize these codes. All right. which simplifies the coding processes and helps speed the reimbursement processes for healthcare providers. Now, the ICD-9 CM was the coding manual that was put out a few years ago for classifying diagnoses. Now it's updated to the ICD-10. In a couple of years you will see an ICD-11, and they'll continue to update as we expand our knowledge of medicine in the medical field. So if you look on page 257 in your textbooks at the very, very top, you will see this, okay? And this helps explain the transition from the ICD-9 code format to the ICD-10 format. So ICD-9, which is this one here, uses a code set made up of 3 volumes. Volume 1 and 2 were used for diagnostic coding, and Volume 3 was used by hospitals to code inpatient services and procedures. ICD-10 follows that same kind of hierarchy structure as the ICD-9 in that the first 3 codes right here represent the category for the disease. If you look on, like I said, if you look on figure 14.1 at the very top, you can see that it says ICD-10 CM codes may consist of up to 7 digits, with a 7-digit extension representing a visit encounter or for injuries or external causes. Okay, so you can see here, ICD-9 had only 5 letters. ICD-10 can have up to 7 numbers and letters. The first 3 are set for the category. And then you have your etiology, atomic site, severity codes, and then your extension in the ICD-10 codes, which are important as well. If you still look on 257 in your book, you'll see this right below figure 14.1. You'll see table 14.1. And this is a table that lists some of the significant differences between ICD-9 and ICD-10. And this is important. This is your first assignment for this chapter. All right, so ICD-9 codes consisted of anywhere from 3 to 5 characters. ICD-10 codes can be 3 to 7 characters, so that is a major difference. The first character in ICD-9 codes could have been alphabetic or numeric. Okay? The first character in ICD-10 codes is always alpha. It's alpha. Characters 2 through 5 are always numeric in ICD-10 coding. And characters 4, 5, 6, and 7, characters 2 and 3 are numeric in ICD-10, but 4, 5, 6, and 7 could be alpha or numeric, depending on the code. You'll always have at least 3 characters in ICD-9 codes, and the decimal place is always placed after the 3rd character in ICD-10 codes. And ICD-10 codes will use every letter except for U, while the ICD-9 codes only used E or V. So it's important to know those 2 differences there, and to really educate yourself on those. So let's flip over to page 258 and look at figure 14.2, which is at the very, very top of the page, and it gives you an example of the general equivalence mapping, which is they're called GEMs. So these GEMs, this is an example of it at the very top. So the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, has developed code maps to help you assist in the changeover from ICD-9 to ICD-10. All right, they kind of help it make it easier and give you a little bit more of a translation. The purpose of this is to create a useful, practical code-to-code translation reference dictionary for both code sets. So this will help increase the efficiency in ICD-10. So these GEMs, or these general equivalency mappings, okay, basically take that in ICD-9 and help you translate it to find the ICD-10 code more easily. This would be very beneficial if you were established in the medical office or as a billing and coding specialist, and you were using ICD-9 all the time. Then the ICD-10 manual comes out. Instead of relearning, okay, these GEMs will help make that translation into the ICD-10 a little bit more easy. And there's a complete list of all the GEMs that are available on the CMS website, which is www.cms.gov. Take a look at that and see, the differences in the codes. So let's talk about the structure and format of this ICD-10 book. So it has both a tabular list and an alphabetical index. All right, so if you look here in your ICD book, the very front of the book, in the gray section, okay, you're going to see your alphabetical index. If you get into the colored sections in the back, they're all separated by color. That is your tabular index, okay? So there's only one letter in the English dictionary that isn't used in the tabular list, and that letter is U, okay? Because the WHO has reserved U to assign to new diseases of uncertain etiologies, okay? So each year, CMS, the Center of Medicaid and Medicare Services, reviews the ICD-10 CM coding manual, and an update is posted on October 1st with any new diseases or changes that they need to make. So CMS prepares official guidelines for coding and reporting to be used with the ICD-10 CM codes, in addition to instructions on how to report the codes on insurance claims. So if you look on page 259, it takes up probably 3/4 of the page. Look at table 14.2 to see the ICD-10 code tabular list of diseases, and basically they show you that there's 21 different tabular lists here, and it gives you an example of each one. So chapter 1 or tabular list number 1 is certain infectious and parasitic diseases. If you look at, for example, chapter 10 or tabular list number 10, you're looking at diseases of the respiratory system. And they give you the code range for that tabular list, as well as some possible diagnoses that would be in there, and an example of that ICD-10 code. So look at that, guys. Really, please look at that and understand how these codes work. So let's talk about the alphabetical index. So this consists of an alphabetical list of diagnostic terms and related codes that it includes. So so it consists of an alphabetical list of diagnostic terms and related codes, and includes main terms for the first one. So the main terms appear in the bold type. So if you look in the gray section of your ICD-10 book, okay, this is what it looks like. This is just an example page. I know it's hard to see, but the bolded terms, so these ones are bolded in like a reddish orange color, those are the main terms. Okay, so they will always appear in bold or in a bolded colored font. Then you have non-essential modifiers. Non-essential modifiers follow the main term and are enclosed in parentheses. So if you look, for example, we have polycystic on this page. Polycystic is the main term. It appears in bold. Right next to polycystic is disease. Now that disease is a non-essential modifier. It is done in parentheses. Okay. Then you have essential modifiers. And essential modifiers are indented one space to the right under the main term. So if you look at polycystic, the first one says degeneration in kidney. Okay, that was indented one indent, so that is an essential modifier. A subterm are indented one space to under the right of an essential modifier. So essentially, those subterms are indented twice. So you'll see the main term, okay, the essential modifier, and then a subterm. It'll go across that way. So for example, polycystic would be the main term. The essential modifier would be degeneration, kidney, okay? And below that, you have a subterm for that one. So it could be autosomal dominant adult type would be a non-essential modifier of that. If that all matches up, there you find your code right next to it. So that would be Q61.2. So that is how the alphabetical index works. If you look on page 258 in your textbook, okay, you're going to see this in the bottom right-hand corner of that page. Now this is figure 14.3, and it shows an example of the main term colitis. Right here, it appears in bold with the modifying term ischemic here. Okay, and the subterm acute. So you see colitis, the main term. You have your essential modifier, which would be ischemic. Your subterm would be acute underneath. If that is what you're trying to look for, okay, your code would be K55.0. So note that the main term is in bold. The essential term is indented once. So bold, everything that lines up here on this first one is going to be an essential term because it's been indented one indent. If it's indented a second one like here, these are subterms. They would appear that way. Now there are some supplementary sections to the alphabetical index, and those could be the table of neoplasms and the table of drugs and chemicals. So it's important to know this. So the table of neoplasms lists neoplasms by anatomic location, and the table of drugs and chemicals, which we will use quite a bit actually, presents a classification of drugs and other chemical substances, and it's used to identify poisonings and external causes of adverse effects, things like that. So basically there are 6 coding classifications in the table of drugs and chemicals. You could have poisonings, you could have accidental, unintentional, poisoning, intentional self-harm, poisoning assault, poisoning undetermined, and then an adverse effect and underdoing. Okay, those are all different types of things there. And then you have your tabular list. Okay, so like I said earlier, when you were talking about the tabular list of diseases and injuries, it's divided into 21 different chapters. Now if you look at page 259, you will see that list that takes up nearly 3/4 of the page. So each chapter is divided into subcategories. All right, in each chapter, all of the 3 character categories beginning with that alphabetical letter is assigned to that chapter. So it's important to note that some codes do not need to extend beyond a 3 character code. For example, like code I-10, which represents essential primary hypertension. Okay, that's it for that code. There does not need for anything else beyond those 3 characters. All right. If a code has more than 3 characters, however, add a decimal point after that 3rd character. So if it was I-10.02 or something along those lines, you need to make sure that you have a decimal after that 3rd character. Each character has a different colored border, each chapter has a different colored bordered strip, as you see here through the ICD-10. After the alphabetical index, you have your tabular list in the back, and they are separated by colors. So if you look on page 261, okay, in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see reporting neck and nose codes. So read up on these guys. I'm not going to read this whole thing for you. It is here for you. Educate yourself on this a little bit here. So there are different conventions that are used in the tabular list, and we'll talk about this for a little bit. So these are found in the tabular list, but they're not found in the alphabetical index, so know the difference. In the tabular list, you can see things like abbreviation, punctuation, symbols, instructional notations, and related entities. So understanding the meaning and using them as guides are a crucial part to accurate coding. So not just being able to locate it in the alphabetical index and pick a code, but taking it from the alphabetical index, looking at the tabular list to really get a specific code. You can have placeholder characters. So the ICD-10 uses a dummy placeholder X in 2 different ways. It can use it as the 5th character in certain 6-character codes, or it can be used to fill an empty character space. So note that a dummy placeholder would not be needed for codes fewer than 7 characters. And then you have codes with 7 characters. So if you look on page 261 in your textbooks, for a list of possible 7th character codes that can be found under the main tabular list. So at the very, very bottom left-hand corner of page 261, you'll see basically the same thing just typed up there. So basically there are 7 codes with 7 characters. The 7th character typically provides specificity about the coded condition. So A, D, and S, you have your initial encounter, your subsequent encounter, and then your sequela. So just read about those. If you look on page 261, you have common conventions used in the tabular list heading, and there's some things there. You can read up on those and really understand why they use different things. They also use brackets meaning different things. So brackets enclose synonyms, alternative wording, and explanatory phrases. Parentheses are used to enclose supplementary words. Colons are used in a tabular index after an incomplete term that needs one or more of the modifiers attached to it. And then you have braces, which enclose a series of terms, each of which was modified by the statement. Okay, so it's important to know the difference of those things. And we're almost done here, guys. Just a couple more slides. You can have an includes note, which is used to clarify when conditions are included within a particular chapter. So the ICD-10 CM uses 2 types of exclusion notes. Either or both of these statements may be present under a category, subcategory, or code. So now those two codes or excluded notes could be clear, not coded here message, or excluded to means not included here. Okay? You can have a code first convention. So code first notes appear under manifestation codes. Manifestation codes specify the way in which an underlying condition appears. It manifests as a result of an underlying etiology. An additional code uses an additional code to indicate the order in which the codes are arranged. Etiology code first, followed by the manifestation code. If you look at figure 14.7 on page 262, which is at the very bottom, you will see an example of a code first note in the ICD manual, so it helps educate yourself there a little bit more and understand exactly what they mean. You can have cross-reference notes, all right? And these instruct the coder to check somewhere else in the index before assigning the code. So you can see things like C, which means if you see C, it follows a main term, it directs the coder to another main term. C also follows a main term and indicates that another main term may be checked that may provide additional useful index entries. And then the C category note directs the coder to a specific category. All right. You can have relational terms such as and, with, and do. And should be interpreted as and or. With should be interpreted as meaning associated with or due to when it appears in the alphabetical index or in an instructional note or code title within the tabular list. And then due to, in both the tabular list and the alphabetical index, the term due to specifies a relationship between two conditions. All right, so coding guidelines. So the coding manual begins with the ICD-10 official guidelines for coding and reporting, so the OGCR. And basically, every coding guideline within the entire ICD-10 CM code is included in this section. So it's a set of rules that have been developed to complement an official conventions and instructional provided by the ICD-10 proper. It's organized into 4 sections, and here are those 4 sections. And this is the last slide we're going to do for today. So the coding guidelines between the table of contents for each of the 4 sections include the related chapters of disease and injury. So those sections are section 1, which is the conventions, general coding guidelines, and the chapter specific guidelines. Section 2 is the selection of principal diagnosis. Section 3 is the reporting of additional diagnosis. And then section 4 is the diagnostic coding and reporting guidelines for outpatient services. So I know I talked about a lot today, guys, but it's really just understanding how to use that ICD manual. If you have questions, comments, concerns, go back and rewatch that section on the video or ask me for an in-person demonstration where you can get your hands on it a little bit more and understand. Coding, guys, is tough. There's a lot to it, so take your time, be patient, and really work to better yourself at this. If you have questions or concerns, please let me know. Other than that, have fun learning.